All right, Brother Spearman.
If you'll bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we humbly thank you for all the blessings you bestowed upon us. Thank you, Lord, for each one gathered here today. Lord, let their knowledge go forth and better prepare us as good people everywhere. Christ our dear's safe name. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Alex Jones, and I'm the boss of the Epsilon Iota Iota chapter of Omega Psi Fraternity Incorporated. On behalf of the chapter brotherhood, I welcome you to our continued Omega Uplift Series, which focuses on COVID-19 and other key issues and its impact in the Black community. Omega has played and continues to play a vital role in the social and economic growth of our country and enhancing the lives of African Americans. We operate under 10 nationally mandated programs, which are centralized issues in our community. As a chapter, these programs address social action, education, health initiatives, voter registration, and mobilization. Under the direction of our 41st Grand Bosselist, Dr. David Marriott, he has implemented the Brother You Are My Mind program. This program focuses on the mental health of Black men and providing areas of assistance for those in need. During this pandemic, he has enhanced this program by asking all brothers of Omega Psi Phi to call 4 different brothers that they might not normally speak with and check in on them every Wednesday. Tonight's topic, we will discuss mental health during these unprecedented times. I would like to take a moment and thank our esteemed panelists, Dr. Gretchen Vaughn, Dr. Karen Du Bois Walton, and our very own brother Al Rahim Williams for agreeing to participate and give their expertise on this very important topic. We also have a host of other initiatives that focus on the relevance and progression of the African American male in communities of color. Our series moderator plays a key role in Omega on not only the chapter level, but also the district and international levels. He is no stranger to the greater New Haven community, where he serves as head coach, a mentor, a leader, as well as an advocate. I will now turn it over to our social action chairman and our Omega Uplift Series moderator, Brother Kevin Walton. We hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Brother Bosselist. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us for our third Community Conversation Uplift Series, sponsored by the Epsilon Iota Iota chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. This program is being sponsored by the Social Action Committee that has worked really hard to try to keep us connected and updated during our COVID-19 quarantine. Tonight's conversation is one that we think is very important, given the turbulent times that we are living in. On May 25th, 2020, many of us watched in complete horror as 3 Minnesota police officers murdered George Floyd. This happened while we were still reeling from the vigilante execution of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia, and the senseless execution of Breonna Stewart in Louisville, Kentucky. All of this while most of the world was on lockdown due to the COVID-19 quarantine. The medical professionals who shared their expertise at our first Uplift series on how COVID was seriously impacting our community due to the health disparities in our community. This is a lot of stress to deal with. Therefore, tonight we have assembled a panel of spiritual, physical, and mental health professionals that are going to help us recognize our stressors and provide tips for healing. So without further ado, we'll get started. I'd like to welcome our first panelist, Dr. Gretchen Vaughn, a local clinical psychologist. And we'll turn it over to Dr. Vaughn. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Epsilon Iota Iota chapter for inviting me and holding this event and recognizing the importance of addressing mental health during this pandemic. A little about me: I live in New Haven. My background is African American and Caribbean. My grandfather was from Barbados. In terms of my bio, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a program evaluator. I attended Yale University for undergraduate studies, the George Washington University for my doctorate, and I did my internship and postdoc at Howard University. HU. Next slide. So I wanted to not talk about self-care without talking a little bit about how I do self-care for myself. You can't preach to the choir if you don't do what you say or tell other people to do. So just in looking at these pictures, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, I can't be with you on Zoom, but there is a picture of me to the left with my mask on. So that's lovely mask made by a local woman here in New Haven. Of course, food is part of my self-care. We've been trying all kinds of recipes during quarantine. Below is my niece, who's a healthcare worker who always inspires me. And the picture in the middle was drawn by my other niece. Her impression of the times that we're in. And I don't know if you can see in the very bottom is a clenched fist in all the fire. And the other things that help me, make me happy are my little grandson at the top, my little grand dog at the right, and listening to jazz and visiting my mom through window visits. And she's a teacher, so she's still teaching. She's showing us a book through her window. Next slide, going on to slide 3. So I wanted to bring to your attention, and we often don't do this, especially when talking with folks, is to be mindful of yourself during this discussion. We're talking about emotions, we're talking about stress. So just monitor your feelings. We use a feeling thermometer. 0 is you're totally relaxed. 10, you're in a full panic, and you can kind of monitor how much your anxiety you're feeling as we go through this conversation, and take care of yourself. If you need to breathe, if you need to take a break from the discussion, feel free to do that as well. Next slide. So when we're talking about stress during these multiple pandemics, it's just layer on layer on top of layer of stress. We've got the stress of racial trauma, we've got COVID-19, we've got health disparities and trauma that already existed in communities of color. And right now, anxiety is normal, and we have to acknowledge that. We've got the stress from being in 3 months of quarantine, of physical and emotional distance from relationships that are important to us in the community and work and school. And we've also got the stress of physical and emotional closeness with the people who we were in quarantine with, our children and our family, who were combined together in home. And no matter how much we love each other, that can also get stressful. So just thinking about how these issues can move us in a few directions, either from engagement and coping in useful ways or disengagement and distress. Next slide. And when I talk about mental health, I always, and people of color, I always need to talk about the legacy of both trauma and resilience in our community. We must start with that context for mental health and substance use disorders in communities of color, the legacy of both trauma and resilience. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart described intergenerational trauma as the collective and cumulative emotional wounding across generations. And unfortunately, this trauma is not often or always considered when people of color seek treatment and seek help. And up until this last month, we had to convince people that racial trauma was real. So we always must realize that the behavior and coping strategies of people in our community who are survivors of trauma is often misunderstood and not treated appropriately. On the other side of the coin, we have to be aware of the resilience. We have to know that our community has assets, including the importance of culture, our institutions, and the creative arts. We can create new narratives informed by our ancestral wisdom. And we can develop trauma-informed care strategies that build on intergenerational strengths and community resilience. Next slide, on to slide 6.
Hey, excuse me, Dr. Vaughn, I stop you for 1 second. We're the audience isn't seeing the slides. We're not seeing the slides.
Oh, okay. So Alex Jones is supposed to be putting them up?
Yeah.
Is he on the call?
Yeah, he's here. He's here.
I'm on. They're coming up.
I'm sorry.
No worries. We'll get it right. It's a friendly audience.
You should have stopped me earlier. This has been a crazy day. I have no internet.
All right. So where are we?
So I'm on slide 6. You can see the number at the very left-hand side in that little red bar.
Okay,
the
right
number
there.
of the slide.
He's there. Complexity of stress in these times.
Yes.
All right. We're good. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. So I also wanted to talk about how stress in these times is really complicated by the pain of loneliness, loss, and grief. And we've got a lot of different kinds of losses that we're dealing with. Loss of roles, a feeling of loss about a role that you may have had prior to COVID that you've been displaced from, either work or school, whatever. Also, anticipatory grief, feelings about an uncertain future and the possibility of danger, illness, and death really increases the amount of feelings of loss and stress we have in these times. And so I wanted to talk about how important it is to name the grief that our community is going through right now, and individuals are going through who may have lost loved ones to COVID. And it's a very difficult time because we don't have the traditional rituals that we have in the past to honor those kind of losses and grieve them collectively. So I wanted us to attend to the shock, trauma, and grief that we're experiencing at this time, and recognize that that's part of our anxiety. But within all of that, opportunities may exist amid adversity for that loss to open us up to new possibilities. We see that we can move forward and honor our loved ones in new ways, such as the protests and the inspiration of young people going out there and really standing up for justice in our community. Okay, next slide, slide 7. So one of the things that we need to think about is radical restorative healing. And it's a way of thinking about people of color going towards healing versus just coping, thriving versus just surviving, and recognizing that community care is part of self-care. And when we look at radical healing and those circles around it, radical healing is loving ourselves, but having an active plan to take care of ourselves. So part of that plan is knowing yourself, your culture, and your own sense of cultural traditions and accomplishments. Having a critical consciousness and sharing those stories. Many of our culture embraces storytelling, and it's really been documented that it has a curative effect in terms of sharing and listening to stories. Of course, having strength to resist and take action. So the marches, the protests, all are part of our restorative healing, as well as working in your community to engage not only self-care practices for yourself, but self-care practices for your community. Next slide. So I'm going to just kind of go through these slides very quickly because I know Dr. Walton and our other presenter are going to talk more in detail about self-care. But in slide 8, I just want to say that a quick way of thinking about self-care is being aware, keeping balance in your life, and keeping connection. And what works for one person may not work for another person. So everybody is individual. Everybody has their own way of caring for themselves. Next slide. So in slide 9, we talk about the importance of developing a self-care plan. Identifying a time to really sit down, think about your current routine, identify areas that you need to improve it, brainstorm and research new things that you can do to take care of yourself. Go ahead and write down your plan. I mean, and it could be putting Post-its on your refrigerator just to remind you of what you're going to do to take care of yourself, and then implement your plan. Next slide, slide 10. Just to talk about self-care involves many, many different areas. So there's the body-mind area. Next slide, slide 11. Then there's the emotional and spiritual area. Next slide, slide 12. Then there's relational, social area, and even financial. You got to take care of yourself financially as well. So I just wanted to go through those self-care areas, and I know that they're going to be discussed a little bit more detail later on. Next slide, slide 13. So what I really wanted to focus on in my presentation is that community uplift is self-care. We need to really focus on the areas and institutions in our community that will help us care for ourselves during this time. And I think there are a few places that we can look. One is the culturally specific formal networks that we have within our communities that we often don't recognize as important mental health, places where mental health can be promoted in our community. So of course, religious communities, fraternities, sororities, sports clubs, museums, civil rights groups, they all can play a role in promoting self-care and mental health. And then there are informal local networks, the natural helpers, such as hairdressers, barbers, artists, and our elders. There's also community-driven services that are available in our community: healing circles, Black therapists, book clubs, storytelling, and art. Those services should be regularly analyzed to see if they're meeting the needs of the community. And then there are also workplace resources. So often in the workplace, there may be affinity groups where people of color can get together and talk, parents can get together and talk. There are also employee assistance programs that will provide you access to mental health professionals at no cost for a certain number of sessions. There's coaching. Some organizations will allow you to have a coach come in and help you deal with some of the things going on in your organization. And believe me, right now, racism is something that organizations are going to have to deal with. We're seeing stories about all these CEOs who are being caught on videotape, spewing out racism on the street, and we know that that is enacted in the workplace as well. And you can also have training as well. Next slide. So I wanted to give a few examples of what's actually going on or has been going on in the community to operationalize that kind of some community self-care. One is called Mind Styles. It's a program that was developed by the Connecticut Psychological Association's Ethnic Diversity Task Force, where they train barbers and hairstylists to recognize the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, and then they encourage them to caringly refer their clients if they see there's a need to mental health professionals. It's interesting when I looked at the Omega Sci-Fi program, Brother, You're on My Mind, that they're doing a very similar thing. They're training people to recognize the signs of mental health issues and training them how to make sure that people are acknowledged, that they're checked in on, and that they get the help that they need. We also have the Community Healing Network that was established by Nola Aird right here in New Haven, but has gone international and national. And the thought behind that network, and full disclosure, I'm a former member of the board, but the idea behind that network was to bring emotional emancipation to Black people, keeping in mind that the 400th anniversary in 2019 of Africans being brought into this country, that the key issue was to defy the lie of white superiority. So that group has established healing circles. They have a toolkit and issues to really work on healing through community and culture. Zola is another example, funeral home that has decided to support grief groups and celebration of life groups for people who have lost loved ones. We've had certain religious and mental health providers collaborate just during this pandemic on developing virtual suicide prevention training. There's a training called Question, Persuade, and Refer, which teaches everyday people to recognize the signs of somebody that may be having a problem, may be considering suicide, and teaches them how to intervene. So this has actually been done virtually, where traditionally had been done through live training. And we have cases where churches have replaced Bible study with mental health discussions during Mental Health Month, and have commemorated the Ma'afa through a program of recreating that experience and having people go through that experience and interact with each other. So those are examples of community efforts that are going on right now to deal with mental health stress and distress in the community. Next slide. I just wanted to give props to your Brother on Your Mind program. It's great. You have a great toolkit. There are activities and exercises. And I think it would be a great idea if Mind Styles and Brother on Your Mind collaborated here in Connecticut. Next slide. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is community advocacy in health and mental health. There is implicit bias toward communities of color, both in the mental health and the health system. So it's really important for us as a community to educate ourselves, know your rights as a patient, a client, and a healthcare worker, and how to actively pursue those rights. We know the statistics with COVID that People of color who are healthcare workers have had to go into dangerous situations without the proper PPE. Clients may have had implicit bias in their care. So it's really important to empower yourself with the resources to combat racism and implicit bias and microaggressions, even in the mental health and healthcare system. And one way to do that is to really endorse and work with culturally competent providers who practice cultural humility and promote social justice. Next slide. And one of the things that we can do, or several things that we can do to make community mental health responses more culturally responsive, minimizing the power dynamics that occur between providers and consumers, to have more of a person-focused treatment, instituting more regular screening protocols for depression, anxiety, and trauma. That should happen in many different places: your doctor's office, school. There are lots of places where we can start screening people and making sure if they are having mental health issues that they get the help that they need. Another thing is integrating peer-based services and traditional healing interventions into the community. It's interesting, I heard about a program in South Africa where they had grandmas trained to sit on community benches, and the people in the community would know what time of day that trained grandma was going to be on the bench, and they could come up and talk to her about what they were feeling and some of their emotional issues, and she could refer them to the proper treatment. It was developed by an African psychiatrist and seems to have had some success. So think about if we had peers at the bus stop, in the supermarket, just places where people are, where people could talk about mental health issues in the community anywhere. And then finally, I think there needs to be representation, of course, in organizational leadership, especially at the board and senior management level. So many times organizations that work with communities of color do not have representation on those levels. So we have to make sure that that starts. Next slide. Slide 18, just kind of a summary: tools to thrive within your community, within your relationships. Destigmatize mental health. We have to work out as a community to destigmatize people talking about mental health issues, finding the positive, feeling gratitude for something every day, eliminating the toxic influences in your life, owning your own feelings and being able to communicate about them effectively, creating healthy routines and developing accountability partners to keep you on those healthy routines. I had a texting partner who, when we were trying to work on our weight, we would text each other each day about what we ate. So having an accountability. And then finally, this is just a quote from the Community Healing Network: if it's going to hurt you or Black people, don't do it. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about resources. There are really a lot of resources out there online. On the left-hand side are national health hotlines. SAMHSA has quite a bit of information on their website. Of course, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a line that you can call, even if you are feeling suicidal, or if you know somebody else who is feeling suicidal, you can call that line, 1-800-273-TALK. They will give you information. They will help you know what to do as your next step. In the middle, these are a lot of resources that are available at the top locally. There's a warm line where young adults can call 7 days a week. There's a New York State line that has emotional support help. New Haven has what's called a Reach Out Warm line, where people can call if they are having issues or questions. And then there are a lot of online ways for you to connect to therapists of color. There are texting connections, Ayana Therapy. There's therapy for Black girls. There's therapy for Black men. So there are resources out there to at least put you in touch with potentially culturally competent providers. Of course, you've got to vet them. Just because they're on a list doesn't mean they're right for you or they're competent. So you've got to vet them. And then on the right-hand side, just to let you know, for people who are in college, the Steve Fund was developed specifically for college students of color and their parents, so they have a lot of information. And mentalhealthscreening.org is a place where you can go and screen yourself. They have all kinds of tools online. If you think you might be depressed, you're not sure, you can go there and really figure out if it's something that you need to actively pursue with a mental health professional. And then next slide. So my final slide is just my contact information, and remind you that the old Bob Marley tune, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. If you have mental health issues, it's so important for you to seek the help that you need. So again, thank you again for your attention. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be on the Zoom video, but we'll pass it on to the next presenters. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. It's very informative and lots of information that hopefully our audience will be able to use. And we do encourage, one of the things Dr. Vaughn pointed out was the importance of utilizing affinity groups if you haven't met your jobs, connecting with family and friends, and as well as EAP if you're still at work or you're headed back to work. And one of the great things that our boss list has done he opens up the Zoom every Friday night for us to fellowship, and it's been a great thing during this quarantine. We get to see each other, stay connected with the brothers, talk some junk, play some dominoes and spades, have a good time. And so it's really a good way for us to connect. So with that, we're going to keep the program moving. But I just wanted to say one thing. I misspoke earlier, and I have to hold space for this woman. I said her name wrong. That queen that was senselessly executed in Louisville, Kentucky was Breonna Taylor. We will all remember to keep her in our thoughts and prayers. All of our brothers and sisters who have been senselessly murdered by the occupying force known as the police departments across America. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter, Dr. Karen DuBois Walton, who is the Executive Director of Elm City Communities and a clinical psychologist. So welcome, Dr. DuBois Walton.
Thank you. Great. I see the slides are up. Perfect. Thank you all. I am so happy to be with you tonight to talk a little bit about preserving our peace of mind, our peace in our soul, our peace in our body through really troubling times. Really want to thank the Epsilon Iota Iota chapter of Omega Psi Fraternity Incorporated for inviting me and for hosting this and the whole series of really important conversations through the Uplift series that you've been holding. Specifically, want to thank the Social Action Committee, who I understand has been leading these. Happy to be in this space with Dr. Vaughn and with Brother Raheem Williams, who will follow me. And I want to take a moment really to slow us down a little bit, and because I want to spend some time really talking about what it's like to experience all that we've been experiencing, and to do that walking through the world in Black bodies and in brown bodies. And so I really want us to start by slowing down for a moment. And, you know, if you're self-conscious and need to turn off your camera, that's okay. But I really want us to just breathe together for a minute. And I want us to feel our hearts beat for a moment. And so when I want to slow down and get connected to my body, I literally put my hand on my chest so I can feel my heart beating. And when I need to slow down, sometimes my heart is beating a little faster than I want it to be. And I can feel that. And I invite you to join me in feeling what's the pace of your heart at the moment. And as I want to come into my body and settle myself, I like to do some breathing. And it's amazing how when we're dealing with stress, we literally can forget to breathe. And if you've ever had the experience where you found yourself in the middle of something and realized you were holding your breath, we literally sometimes forget to breathe. So before I start, we're really going to actually take a moment to breathe, still with your hand on your heart. And when I want to do some intentional breathing, I will actually breathe in through one side of my nose and breathe out on the other. And I'll do it actually by holding one side of my nostril, right? So I'll breathe in and I'll hold the other one to breathe out. And I can even sort of inconspicuously do it in my office or around other people. And folks don't even realize sometimes what I'm doing, right? When I need to just settle myself and breathe in and breathe out. And breathe in and breathe out. And I do that because what I want to talk about tonight really connects to racial trauma and things that we're holding in our bodies and in our souls. And so thank you, Brother Walton, for that introduction. For those that don't realize, we are like a room apart right now, living in the same house. I appreciate that my husband has invited me into the space to do this. So I am trained as a clinical psychologist. I trained after attending Yale. I went to Boston University to pursue my PhD and trained there. And I was drawn to Boston University to study under a psychologist named Hussein Bulhan, whose focus area and study area was the expertise, and his expertise was in the psychology of social oppression. And I mention that because there is a long history of study around this that isn't always centered in traditional Western mainstream psychology, but actually has a long root of recognizing that there is an impact on us today of the generational impact of the different sorts of traumas that have been inflicted upon our communities. And so I root in that. I moved from doing direct service into more public policy work and have really focused on how do we create communities that are organized in ways and provide the supports that help people move beyond thinking of survive and move into how to think about thrive. And so that's the work that we do. So I present this to you under the company that Kevin and I have founded. Our consultancy is Wise Dog Strategic Solutions, and we consult on racial justice healing and liberation. And for organizations, we work around moving beyond diversity and inclusion into working on equity work. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So want to really talk about and situate what we're experiencing as a community, as a people, around really acknowledging that we are experiencing a series of traumas layered upon different layers of traumas that occur individually for us at the personal level. There are all sorts of ways in which we individually in our own personal life may have been impacted by COVID and the racial trauma that's happening and the community unrest and the uprising that's happening around this. So there are things that may absolutely individually, personally have impacted us, stressed us, that have created some level of disruption that that has created some trauma for us personally. We also experience trauma in the interpersonal, in relationship, that there can be things that happen between people, within families that contributes to this. We're seeing community level disruption that happens. There are things that happen that traumatize entire communities, groups of people. And so we pay attention to that. And there's this level of racial trauma that is overlaying all of this, interspersed, intertwined in all of this. And so we're holding all of this. We hold this in our minds, we hold this in our bodies, and we hold this in our spirits. You can go ahead to the next one. What we do with that is so important, because when you're experiencing something that is traumatic, there are some very natural emotions that we may experience. Emotions such as anger and rage, anxiety, worry, fear, sadness, depression, all associated with experiencing trauma, loss, disruption, right? And at the same time, when faced with this accumulating numerous on top and on top and on top of trauma, we also may find ourselves feeling disconnected from that emotional life, feeling disconnected from our feelings, and instead being numb or feeling desensitized. And you may have an experience where you hear about something and it's something that should bring sadness, it should bring anger, should bring rage, should bring worry. And you find yourself that you just sort of take it in and move on to the next thing. Maybe it doesn't even register anymore, right? Signs that we become numb to things or desensitized to things. And when you think about how does that happen, I mean, we need to think about the series of things that have happened to our ancestors, to our legacy, to the folks that we're descendants of, and to us every day. Things that go back 400 plus years, things that are happening to us every day. Things that should be long gone in the history that are resurfacing. We in 2020 should not still be talking about lynchings, and yet we've seen a number of cases that others would want to dismiss as suicides that look very much like lynchings, right? We've seen police brutality. We're holding vigilante attacks. We have the racial trauma of every day going out into the world and being concerned simply because we're driving while Black. We have the moments where we want to simply move ourselves through Macy's and we find that we are the only ones being followed as we move through the store. We deal with everyday microaggressions. The term micro fails to even seem like it should go with what we experience. We have moments of very visible public humiliation. We have moments where our credentials are questioned in ways that that feel like more private humiliations. We have moments where our belonging is questioned, like should we even be in a particular space? We have moments where we're exoticized, right? All of these things are pieces of what we hold and carry every day and things that take a toll on us. Sometimes we watch the really egregious examples, like for those that watch the 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the last moments of Mr. George Floyd's life, right? And there's something traumatic that we experience in watching a man in front of us losing his life, but there's also something traumatic that's connected to watching a man being humiliated in that way in front of others, right? And we carry all of that in us. And so we are hardwired, right, to have emotions, to have emotional reactions. And somewhere along the way, we started to get messages about things being good emotions or bad emotions. And part of what I want to do is counter some of that, because emotions just are. They are the natural reactions that we have that derive out of the circumstances that we're in, the relationships we're in, and others. And we all have them. And we all experience them from infancy on. And in relationship with others, we start to put labels to what those feelings are. And we develop words for that and begin to connect to our emotional life in ways that we can communicate with other people about it. And we know how we're feeling based upon how we've connected, what that feels like in our body, and what's happening to us, and where our mind goes, and what we're feeling in our soul, and what words have been attached to that by others, others in our life. So I ask you for just a minute to think about who taught you about emotions. What can you remember about your first ways in which you got a sense of what it felt like to be sad and what it felt like to be angry? And when you had a full range of emotions, and when you started to get messages that said some emotions were good emotions and some emotions were bad emotions or negative emotions, because we all have stories around that, and we all have ways in which that language got developed for us. You can go to the next slide. The other thing that happens is that society has accepted that certain things, and I want to particular, I'm so thrilled that an African-American men's organization is leading in this space around really paying attention to our inner life and our mental health, because there's so many messages out there that say to men and say to Black men, messages that they should be divorced from their emotional life, that there's only certain emotions that they should feel free to express. It's so important to create spaces where we can counter that and help to connect to those things. So there are lots of different emotions, and if you could think about it, if anybody's close to the chat box and wants to throw some things in there, I want us to think for a moment about what are the emotions that we're socialized to accept from men. And if anybody wants to throw anything in the chat box, they can. But as we think about that, right? What we are socialized to associate as okay emotions from men. We tend to have socialized and grown up in a community that socializes things like it's okay for men to express strength, it's okay for men to express anger, it's okay for men to express rage, right? It's okay for men to express aggression, and we often find that right, I'm seeing we send messages to men, not that it's not okay to express sadness, it's not okay to cry, right? So they're messages that we're sending which begin to say that these emotions are okay and you can dwell in this space, and these emotions aren't. Yet emotions are for all of us. We experience all of them, right? In a similar way, we can think about what emotions are we socialized to associate with women, right? And often it's the reverse of whatever you thought about in the male category, right? And that there's something positive for women associated about being nurturing and what's called emotional, right? Being connected to that. And often women get a negative message about expressing anger or outrage, or right. So we think about that, and then you can break it down even further and think about how is that different for Black men and women? What's acceptable for Black men? What's acceptable for Black women? And what's not, right? And on we can dig into this. And so over time, because we grow up breathing this air, right, we end up with a very circumscribed set of emotional reactions that we've been told is acceptable to express. But if we have all these feelings and we're only able to express certain ones of them, the big secret is that the other ones, the other emotions don't go away. They're still there. And that energy that lives in our bodies is still there and expressing itself in different ways. And those ways can be health affirming and help you grow, or they can be things that really get in your way, block, and lead to more negative outcomes. You can go ahead to the next slide, Adrian. So I want to spend the bulk of my time, the rest of my time, I don't have too much more here, thinking about what do we do with the very powerful emotions that come up as a result of racial trauma. And think about what happens to that energy that doesn't get expressed. We can express the full range of our emotions and feel a full emotional life, or we can send ourselves messages that we have to swallow our rage, swallow our sadness, swallow our grief. And when we do that, that energy can come out in many different ways that can project it onto somebody else, can take it out on somebody else, can come out in health impacts for us. We might see it in high hypertension and high blood pressure and other things that are taking a toll because that energy is still living within our bodies. So what we want you to move to, if you move to the next slide, is our goal in life is to figure out how we can, what we refer to as get on par, right? And being on par is our acronym for three things that we really want to focus on: being present in the moment, acknowledging and accepting your feelings, and having health inspiring, positive ways to release and to seek the relief that we need around all of the things that we're experiencing. So presence, let's start with presence on the next slide. You know, it's been said that we can be, as people, we can be oriented toward living in the past, we can be oriented toward being in the present moment, or we can be oriented toward future. And folks that are too oriented, too stuck in the past tend to live with regret. And those who are too oriented to what's going to come, what's in the future, tend to have a compass that is oriented toward worry and anxiety. And those of us that can actually take a moment to breathe, to center ourselves, to ground ourselves, and to experience what's happening for us right here in this moment, living in the present, have been shown to have much more positive mental health outcomes and much more positive health outcomes. So what I mean by being in the present, right? By being in the present, stress and anxiety and depression take us out of the moment that we're in right now. And so part of managing our stress is really practicing how can we be present, right? How can we experience that what we are together right here in this moment on June 17th at 6:57 in the evening, that this is the moment we want to be in. And we want to spend some time centering our bodies in our breath, which is why I started there with some breath work. And there are lots of different ways that we can refer you to around how to do some breath work. There are beautiful apps at this point. There are things you can look up on YouTube that will help you. But I'm not going to go too much into it because I'm pretty sure that I'm teeing that up a little bit for Raheem's piece later. But the hand over heart work, the breathing work is meant to help ground you back into your body. We also need to spend a lot of time noticing that we become so frenzied in our world, so overwhelmed with all these negative, but even the positive things happening can just have us bouncing. And one thing that COVID in the beginning days of COVID did, I think, was slow us down. It gave us time to notice. It gave us time to center ourselves. And so we want to spend some time thinking about how to notice and center. And some of the ways that our community is very oriented around this is through prayer and meditation. Folks have made the reference that prayer is when you send your message out to your higher being, you're speaking to your God, and meditation is when you're taking the time to listen for the message back. So presence. Let's go to the next one. Once you've grounded yourself and focused on your presence, then I want you to give yourself space to acknowledge and accept the full range of your emotional life. All those emotions you've been told aren't for you, shouldn't be acknowledged. They are parts of you. They're parts of your experience, and you need to own them and claim them and feel free in that whole range of emotional life. And so stress and anxiety can separate us from connecting to our emotions, and our healing requires us to get back to managing that full range of the feelings that come up about our COVID experience, the feelings that come up about racial trauma, but the feelings also that come up about joy and beauty and all of that. And so we want to help you get connected to what those feelings are. Some of us need to learn the language of feelings and emotion. For some people, that's second nature. Other people need some help connecting to what is that feeling in my body that I'm having right now. So we want to work on noticing feelings, being intentional about recognizing and naming them, and being free to claim them, that this is how you're feeling in this moment, and that is your right to feel that in this moment in a judgment-free zone. And sometimes doing some self-affirmation about yourself, talking to yourself about how you're feeling is important. And we do this just as we learned as little kids. We learned emotion in relationship. we will express our growth in our emotion in our connection with others. So our healing is also about connection to others. And I like some of those pieces from Dr. Vaughn's presentation as well. I think they tie in here. Another way about connecting with your feelings can be talking about it, writing about it, journaling about it. So those are always helpful. And finally, the R, the next slide, is then we need to find, go back one, AJ. We need to find ways to release and find relief, and to do this in healthy ways that really are health promoting. And so physical movement is a great one. I think Raheem's going to help us move a little bit tonight, but you can do that in whatever way your body will allow. Gentle walks, you can become a marathon runner, wherever in there. The point is that you're moving your body because you're moving some of the energy that gets trapped in your body and some of that trauma that gets trapped in your body. We need to focus on healthy behaviors like our healthy eating, getting into a sleep routine, getting into an exercise routine. And sometimes maybe you might be experiencing sleep disturbance, and the more you can get to some of these pieces, you'll actually find that you can get yourself into a sleep routine. Again, talking about it, writing about it, and just not going it alone. That we are meant to be social people. We are people that are tied to community, and our well-being is also connected in that way. There is so much to be stressed about and worried about that comes at us every day. And so limit your exposure to things that are stressing you out. Don't overschedule yourself. You have to make time for yourself. Do that plan that Dr. Vaughn talked about. We often are socialized to seek food, seek alcohol, seek other substances to deal with our emotional life. And the truth is that reliant on other substances only takes you farther away from the connection to your emotional life that we need for this release and relief and presence and acknowledgement of our feelings. And finally, Dr. Vaughn gave some great resources. My last slide is about resources. We can't ever be afraid to reach out for help. Help can come in the informal networks, in our circle, in our supports, in our spiritual leaders. It can also come in the professional frame. So for those of you that have employers that offer an employee assistance program, help can come from your EAP provider, which will typically offer you some sessions covered by your employee benefit, and then can often refer you if there's some longer term services that are needed. Certainly spiritual leaders can be a useful resource in dealing with the anxiety and emotions that we're experiencing. And then if you're looking to get additional services, we have both local and national services mentioned on here, ways in which you can find referrals. There are some great apps. I mentioned the Liberate Meditation app, something you can download from any of the app stores and help you with the presence and connection and healing. And then a few local resources. One Village Healing offers some amazing body work, healing space, yoga spaces. We're going to promote Raheem's work in a minute, let him talk about that. And some places, if you're looking for some counseling services, are mentioned on the slide as well. So with that, I will close and turn this over to Raheem.
Well, not quite. So I think we have time for one or two questions. So Ruel, you have one or two questions?
Yes. I have one question. Is disconnecting vital for surviving? File it in a box and just moving on.
Is disconnecting vital?
Vital for survival. Just filing in a box and just moving on.
So the way I think about disconnecting is disconnecting from some of the distractions out there so that we can get connected again to our own selves, right? And so in that way, I think disconnecting is very, very important, right? That might be a morning ritual that you start your day with, right? Which is a way of you're disconnecting from all the other stuff, right? Turn off the MSNBC, turn off CNN, whatever your morning news is, right? And taking a moment to disconnect from that and the other distractions and find some time to connect to your inner peace, to think about what your inner affirmations might be for the day, to set your intention for the day, to do some breathing and centering, to have some quiet time. I think that is incredibly important. Disconnecting, though, in terms of relationship, I would say is not what I'm recommending, right? That I think what we want to do is remain in connection with people that are speaking life into us, right? People that are part of our support network, people that are not a drain on our energy, people who are not in an abusive relationship with us, right? That we find those healthy connections, and that is a part of the healing, I would say.
Okay, that was the only question that we had so far, Brother Vaughn.
Great. Thank you all.
All right.
Question.
Thank you. So now,
I think someone was jumping with a question.
all right.
Hi, it's Larry X. Good evening. Specifically, that question was regarding her comments about becoming numb to the situations, differentiating that from just basically coping versus really becoming disconnected from your emotions and feelings. How do you differentiate the two? Was the question. I'm going to mute myself again.
Great, thank you for clarifying so that I was so I can be sure to answer your question as you were posing it. So I think that choosing to disconnect from something is a choice that we can make, right? And we have some agency in that. And there are certainly many times that we have to choose to disconnect from something. That is part of our healing, part of our preserving our health, is to know when we need to say, nope, that's not for me, need to move away from a situation, from a relationship, from people, from a job environment, right? But we have to know those boundaries that we have to call for ourselves. I think we find numbing to be, numbing is, it feels to be, you know, that whole sense of a defense mechanism is that it's operating at the sort of unconscious level. And so it's less, you feel less agency in that. It's not as though you made that choice like, I choose to be numb and not pay attention to this right now. Instead, you find that that's the way that your mind and body are taking you without your sort of choice point. I think that's the distinction I'm making. So I'd say yes to disconnecting in ways that are your choice to preserve your health and your mind and your body. But where numbness has become something that's taken over and you're not feeling the joys, you're not feeling, right, we want, as people, we want to feel the full range of emotions. We don't want to be overwhelmed by them and overcome by them, but we want to be able to have that sense that when something heartbreaking happens, that you want to be able to experience the heartbreak just as you want to be able to experience the joy of love. You don't want to be so numb to the world that nothing touches you anymore, because that has a negative effect on your own well-being. It has a negative effect on your ability to connect with other people and hold relationships. So I would say yes to intentional boundaries that you set for your own well-being. But if you find it's numbing, let's figure out some ways to get yourself connected again to your presence, your emotional life, and your release and relief.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for all the information, Dr. Du Bois-Walton. And now I know that I'll stop asking when I see you doing your breathing mechanism. I'll start asking if you're good now. So listen now. So
I'm good.
So last but certainly not least, we're going to turn it over to our chapter brother Al Rahim Williams. And Rahim is the owner of Grade School Yoga, and he is actually a registered yoga teacher. So it's not some dude that likes to stretch and is trying to get you to come stretch. He's actually a 500-hour registered yoga teacher. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Al Rahim Williams.
Thank you, Brother Chair. Welcome, good evening to all. My name is Al Rahim Williams. AJ, you can put this slide up. Let's just get the presentation going. So this presentation is going to piggyback a large part off of, go to the cover page, AJ, thanks. It's going to piggyback off of a large part of what Dr. Walton has just presented to us. So first I want to just introduce you to myself. I am a 500-hour registered yoga teacher. I went to University of New Haven, got my MBA and my electrical engineer degree from UNH. And in 2008, I decided to become a yoga teacher. And in 2009, I completed my first 200-hour teaching certification course. And then about 6-8 years later, I decided to go back and go for my 500-hour teaching certification. The distinction is that at each level, you have to complete a certain number of teaching hours in order to receive that designation. So I've been teaching for about 12 years, and I've taught all over New Haven, Trumbull, Milford, at YMCA, LA Fitness, some social groups. We have leadership, education, athletics in partnership with New Haven, and also at some schools, particularly South Kent, which is a private school in Connecticut. I would first like to thank my mother, who has joined us on this call, who introduced me to yoga at a very young age. And she's also currently a Buddhist teacher. So we share a lot in common. You see, I have my information on the bottom of the screen, and you can reach out to me for the Saturday Zoom information. Next slide. Yoga. So what is yoga? Well, from the definitions written on the screen, at the most practical level, it's a process to become more aware of who we are, self-discovery, kind of, which leads us to like self-mastery and self-realization, just awakening. There's no dogma that's associated with this. This is a belief system. There's no belief system attached to it. This is something that anyone can do from all backgrounds. And so I really want people to really understand that when someone says yoga, oh, that's associated with a religion, it is not associated with a religion. It's the yoking of the mind, body, and soul. Next slide. So yoga, there are 8 limbs of yoga. Most people do not know that. When they hear the term yoga, they just see a bunch of people stretching, and they just automatically assume that that's the only things that are associated with yoga. That is yoga, except there are actually 8 limbs to it. And in each of these limbs, there's the first one, which you see is the yamas. And yamas just really means restraint. And it's a system of physical postures to be mindful of. Next one is niyama. It's like you're observing your own personal behavior, and how does that awaken as you practice yoga? The asanas, it's the actual physical posture. That's what you actually see in the gyms and the yoga studios. So they don't say come to asana practice, they say come to yoga. So, but just know that the physical movements are really the asanas, and it's just to move the life energy within the body. Next one is pranayama. It's breath control. It's your life energy. So when you come into this world, you breathe, and when you leave this world, you're no longer breathing. It's the one thing that we all share in common. And it's the one vital thing that allows us to kind of center ourselves, clear our minds, and also relieves tension in the body. Pratyahara is introversion. It's understanding the senses and how they arise, your feelings, and being able to focus on that. Then we have dharana, is your concentration. Can you slow the thoughts of the mind down? Then you have the meditation with dhyana, and that's a state. So meditation, there's a state. So you say, well, I'm going to meditate today. And as you go through your meditation, you're trying to achieve a state of stillness, being one within the mind and the body. So body is the ultimate freedom. It's when you leave your body, or where you achieve that ultimate peace. Next slide. So here are some of the benefits of yoga. And let me qualify by saying this. This is not absolute, but it's a science. Yoga is a science. And there have been studies that the medical industry is now studying it in the effects on the body and in different traumas that may occur within a person's experience. And so the first one, it says you can decrease stress. And so cortisol is an enzyme that is released when you experience stressful conditions. And so there have been studies where they've done control groups, and within those control groups, there may be 26, 200. It really just depends. And what they've learned is that they'll separate the groups, and one group will not do any yoga or practice any yoga, but will still go through some of the physical exercises. And then the other group will do some yoga and practice it regularly. And then they'll come back and test them. And they've seen that it's actually reduced the secretion of this enzyme. And so they seem to be less stressful. And then, anxiety. So they've really started to introduce this into the military specifically. And Karen had alluded to racial trauma, being stopped by the police, and the things that we are experiencing now can cause PTSD. And so, and one of the other control groups, they studied people who have experienced PTSD. They had them go through a 6-month yoga and also other techniques, physical exercises. And they seen that about half of them no longer qualified as a PTSD candidate. And the others had reduced the number of symptoms. It may reduce inflammation. And the reason why I say it may reduce inflammation is because when you're going through some of the postures, it increases the circulation, the blood flow. And so what we tend to do is, because COVID actually slowed us down, as Dr. Walton had expressed earlier, we're sitting more. We're in the house. And so if you sit long periods of time, you have a tendency to cut off the circulation in certain parts of the body. And some people may have ailments already. So just that movement, the constant movement, and they're seeing this a lot now, especially with elderly people, getting them to move and do simple yoga movements and increasing their circulation. The heart health was a big one. As we was going through our training, we had to write papers on some of the benefits of yoga. And so high blood pressure, obesity, those things that affect the Black community in a large scale. They've seen that if you, with yoga, combination of yoga, your diet, and other wellness programs have really helped to change that dynamic and reduce the blood pressure, improving the quality of life. So adjunct therapy is the combination of yoga and something else. And so, the quality of life can definitely improve as you practice. Depression is another factor. There's also hormones that are produced when you're experiencing a depressed state. And so yoga is just one of the other effects or benefits from it. The one that is really, that I see the most, and it'd be surprised, is improving the flexibility and balance. When students come into my class, and I teach at a gym and it's open, to the public, you'd be surprised how many people are not able to just stand upright for long periods of time and just maybe move their arms. And maybe it throws off their equilibrium, or if they lift one leg, they have an issue with it. So it's a part of, trying to do something and actually just allowing the body to just do it. Breathing, as both Dr. Walton and I have stressed, the lung function. Different breathing exercises allows the lungs and rib cage to expand and contract, more so than you would normally. And so doing these different breathing exercises allows you to have a better night rest sleep. And so, I encourage everyone, she started off with a breathing exercise and we'll end with one, just to kind of use that and give you the tools to feel how breathing is one of the main components of yoga. And as you move, you breathe. And some people, when they get into stressful conditions and situations, like she said, they stop breathing, or even in exercise. And you'd be surprised how many weightlifters will hold their breath while they're pushing weight and not allowing, because we draw strength from our breath. So some of the other ones, the eating habits, mindful eating. You can't go have McDonald's and then go take a yoga course. You'll be sick to your stomach. So yoga, it definitely tells you to watch what you eat, especially as you go and do any physical exercise. Strength part is something that I personally experienced as I was trying to compete in a bodybuilding competition. So the weight training combined with the yoga allowed my muscles to elongate and be flexible, but not be stiff. And then it's also allowed the supporting muscles that sometimes do not get exercised during weight routines because they focus on the large parts of the muscle. And so the combination of both gives you the leanness and also produces mass. Next slide. So there are just a few types of yoga. I won't go through all of them, but Vinyasa is the one that I do and I've been certified in. And the difference between some of the other ones and Vinyasa is that you will do an upward dog. It's a combination of going from plank to a downward dog, an upward dog, and that will always be interwoven within the series of poses. And you're moving, you're constantly moving, and the sequences will change. And a good yoga instructor will construct a sequence to get everyone on the same page so that they're moving together and they're also breathing together. The top one I just wanted to mention is Kemetic and Hatha yoga. Kemetic yoga, now most people believe that it derived in India, but there's research that's out now that the hieroglyphics that are in some of the tombs in Africa are actually our ancestors practicing what they call Kemetic yoga, because there's a system of poses. And if you move through those poses, you can feel the same benefits. And it's believed that those that migrated towards India brought this system with them. And then those yogis created the Hatha part. I want to touch on hot yoga for a minute. People say, oh, I love hot yoga. So there's different hot yoga. There's Bikram, which has a set series of poses that won't change. And there's a temperature in the room. And in yoga, for hot yoga, it's the temperature in the room that creates the heat within the body. In the other yoga practices, it's the movement of the poses that create the internal heat that help release the toxins. So the environment, you may walk into a hot yoga and you may start sweating profusely. That's fine and that's good. Make sure you bring water. But in other practices, it's the movement that actually creates the release of the toxins through sweat. The last one is Forrest, Anna Forrest, at Fresh Yoga here in New Haven. I studied under Heidi, and Ralph Gates is who my teacher was, but Heidi studied under Anna Forrest, and it's a very interesting style of yoga where it requires the same level of strength in most of them, but they actually get a little bit deeper into some of the back bends, some of the inversions. And so if anyone in New Haven if you ever come to New Haven, please stop by Fresh Yoga. Next slide. Who can do yoga? Everyone and anyone. I say this, it doesn't matter what your body type, how old you are, how young you are, anyone can practice yoga. If you're disabled, you can practice yoga. And so we just need to, when you turn on the TV or you order a P90X, which was once the thing, and you see the yoga bodies, as people like to refer to them, it's always some slim and slender, male or female, and that's not entirely the case. It's for everyone, all body types, and you don't have to be in great shape to practice yoga. And I think that's the other thing that I hear a lot, especially from my frat brothers. I'm not flexible, I can't do it, and they get into this whole head trip thing, and they don't realize that, and men in particular, Black men in particular, don't realize that we've been doing yoga all our lives. It's just we've called it other things. And so when you enter into a studio or you come take an online class, which I encourage everyone to do, you have to remember, just be present and be a student. Some of us are teachers and coaches, and we ask that of our players and participants, but then shy away from things that are new or maybe different that they haven't been used to. And so I encourage everyone to take the time to be a student first. Next slide. All right, it's very important, the do's and don'ts. If you have any physical impairments, I don't care what it is, please consult your doctor before doing any physical activity. And please don't trying to eat before class. You will get sick, especially in some of the more intense yoga practices, and there'll be you can get sick. Weight training, if you're going to do weight training, it should be before and it should be either in the morning, whatever you feel comfortable with, and then do yoga in the evening. Try not to do it both at the same time. I know some people, if you enter a gym, they'll go work out and then try to do a yoga class. That can lead to injury because you're overexerting the muscles. So in my classes, some people will come to me after they take an hour course and say to me, "Oh, I have this ailment. Do you know anything that you can do? Any yoga poses that I can do?" And sometimes I cringe because I could have gave them that advice before and gave them a modification so that they wouldn't continue to stress whatever ailment that they have. So please, just tell your teacher beforehand. When you come to the mat, if you get exhausted, rest. Take your time. and then come back to the mat. Practicing with a partner, significant other. Since you're spending so much time, it's always good to grab your significant other, your friend, or whomever you're spending the most time with, since we're being shuttered indoors, and just to sit and either sit back to back and just feel each other's breath by doing breathing exercises or doing stretches and supporting each other in some of the stretching exercises that you can do. It's a different level of intimacy without it having to be of a sexual nature. There are different styles and teachers, and you really need to research and try different ones to see that works within you. And again, be a student. Next slide. So I don't know, AJ, I don't think anybody can see me. Can anybody see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can see you, Rob.
Okay, I didn't know. All right, so here I have a bottle, and this is what stress looks like. This is your thoughts. This is your mind, and in your mind, as you traverse through your daily life, you'll have the big items that you take care of, your family, your job. Then you have the other items that will be ancillary. What do you have to do for the day? And what's coming up, and you're planning. And then you have those microaggressions, and that's the sand, that's represented the sand. And as you go through life, this is what happens with your thoughts. And this is how your mind you start to tackle the big things. And because you're just constantly thinking about that, it just causes stress. And if you notice, the big things will settle and you take care of them first. But the other stuff that we experience, certain microaggressions that may experience at work, take time to settle. And so the breathing exercises, the movements, allows for your water to settle and clear, your sand to settle and your water to clear. And if you can kind of take something away from that, is so we remember that. One of the things I want to go through with you, if you're currently sitting, you can sit in an uprighted position and with your feet to be on the floor, firmly on the floor. As you sit, when you're sitting, the one thing that you have to remember is that if you don't have an ergonomic chair, then use a pillow or a blanket to raise your hips above your knees, and now relieve the tension within the back. So I'd like for everyone to just kind of raise your hands up over your head. And as you do so, you're lifting through the rib cage. As you lift through the rib cage, you can interlace your hands over your head. You're squeezing your arms up by your ears. And you can do this standing and you can do this sitting. I'm just electing to do it sitting because sometimes we don't have the ability to just stand and do this. And so you can just kind of take your arms and send them to the right and keep lifting through the rib cage as you squeeze your arms by your ears. And you can come back to center and then take your arms to the left, lifting through the right side of your body. And you allow yourself to breathe in naturally and breathe out. And then you come back to center, and then you can release the hands. Now, if we're in a standing position, hopefully everybody can see me. Sometimes it's good after sitting for an hour to stand or move for 20 minutes. It's just one of those ergonomically correct things to do. So if you do the same thing we sweep our arms up over our head and interlace our hands. And then we can just kind of send our arms to the right and send our hips to the left. And you press down through the right hand, or right foot, excuse me. And then you just come back up. And you send your hands to the left. And you press down to the left side. And then you inhale back to center. And you can just bring your hands back and lift through the rib cage, bringing your hips forward. As you lift through the rib cage, you relax the shoulders so that the arms can come back, and then you can lift your head. And then you come back to center, and then you can slowly come forward. As you come forward, you keep your arms forward. And you should do so, you send your hips back, lengthening through the spine. And then you can come back up when you release the hands. And so as you do that, it's good because it actually restores energy within the body. And one of the other breathing techniques that we do within the class is, in movements, is we sweep our arms up and we inhale up. And as we inhale up, we picture from our belly button to our throat as the bottle of water. And so when we inhale up, we fill the bottle of water all the way up until it's completely full. And then on our exhale, we slowly release the water and allow the water to fully go out. And we do that a few more times. And as you do so, you're allowing the breath in the body to become one. And as you do that a few more times, you can really feel how the energy begins to shift. And your water begins to settle. Your sand begins to settle and your water begins to clear. Karen had took you through one of the breathing exercises. And so one of my other breathing exercises is when we tell people to come to a comfortable seated position. And the main thing is you want to be comfortable anytime you start any breathing exercises or any meditative. And you can use a pillow if you don't have a block to do so. And so I want the participants to just kind of breathe with me. But instead, we're going to sit and focus on the base of our spine. And from the base of your spine, I want you to imagine a golden shaft of light that starts from the base of the spine and extends to the crown of the head. And as you do so, you're going to inhale fully and deeply with deep breaths. Inhale through the nose and exhale out through the mouth. And let the breath fully come out. And you take a deep breath in and a long breath out. And if you can do that a couple more times on your own, you allow yourself to kind of settle into the space and feeling the breath be normal, allowing your water to start to clear. The breathing exercises are accessible to everyone. And if you do so and you find yourself in a situation, in a stressful situation, use a breathing exercise. Just to close, one of the things that athletes do, and since most of us were former athletes, I know in my chapter, if you ever pay attention to people that come to the free throw line, they always take a deep breath in and a long breath out in stressful situations. Baseball players as well, they'll come to the plate and they'll breathe. They'll take a deep breath. So there's a reason for that because it's the calming of it. Some of the meditative states that we can, quick meditation practice that you can do is when you close your eyes, you can visualize a place that you would like to be. you want to visualize something that brings peace, calmness. And as you do so, you bring your awareness to the tip of your nostril. As you bring your awareness to the tip of your nostril, now you can take a breath in. You want to feel how the cool air comes in. And on your exhale, you feel the temperature change to a warm feeling. And you take a slow breath in and a slow breath out. And as you keep your eyes closed and keep imagining and visualizing this space, you can feel your water starting to be still and calm. And then you can open your eyes. And thank you very much to the brothers. Omega Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Epsilon Iota Iota Chapter. Art.
All right. Well, good. Thank you, Ra. And I told you that he's a real yoga instructor. Ra, do you want to let people know where they can see you teaching?
Yes. So you can go on. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, Gray Skull Yoga, and I do live sessions Mondays and Thursdays, and on Zoom you can just DM me for the information. I will be going back. The gyms are opening, so they've requested my presence, so I will still stream live at that location.
All right, great. Thank you. So listen, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for those of you. Looks like most of you have stayed, even though we went past our time. It's what we know, what the rest of the world is starting to catch on to, is that we are talented. We have all of the things that we need to help our communities cope and survive. So I want to thank Dr. Gretchen Vaughn. I want to thank Dr. Karen Du Bois Walton, and I want to thank Brother Al Rahim for being with us tonight, sharing those tips about mental health, physical and spiritual awareness and spiritual health during these crazy times. If we may, I know we have Karen and Rahim still on the line. I don't know if there's one or two questions you'd like to get to, Ruel, or if there's anything. If not, we can wrap and call it a night.
We had one question for Rahim about someone said that they've been having pain from a herniated disc, and they wanted to know if he think that yoga would be good for helping with that.
Yoga can be an adjunct therapy to any herniated disc. We have to be very careful about the back. And any stresses in the back. Anytime we have injuries in the back, it's usually due to a weak core. And so I would definitely go to a chiropractor first and see the extent of the injury before going and taking any yoga practice.
Okay, and the next question was just basically his information about when he has his classes.
AJ, you can put that back up on the screen so that they can copy down the information.
Yep.
All right. So while we wait to get that back up, I just want to once again thank everybody. I see some of the bros from different chapters checked in with us. I think the beauty of Zoom is that we can always support each other's events. as long as we have the information. So rude to the brothers for checking in, and thank you for everyone who has come on these series. We will have a couple of more, and then please look for us in the late summer and fall as we hope to transition back to in-person meetings. But if that's not the case, we will always have Zoom. There are always issues in our community that need to be dealt with, so we will be around to address those. I think they have it back up. And Rob, if you could just give them that information once more, even though I know it
And
is
you can
free.
follow me on Gray Skull Yoga, and that's Gray, GRAYSKULL, on IG or Facebook. Mondays and Thursdays, 7 p.m. live.
All right. Well, great. Again, thank you to our presenters. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Social Action Committee, who works really hard to put these events on for you, including our bossless, Alex Jones, our vice bossless, Ruel Dixon, Brother Gigi Martindale, Brother Craig Streeter, Brother Libby Spearman, Brother Nasiki Reed, Brother David Cockrell, and Brother Jordan Johnson. So again, thank you, and please look out for our next series. Good night, everyone. AJ, are we staying on? I got another call at 8.
Yeah, we're staying on